Good morning. Today is Wednesday, November 1st, 2023. This is a meeting of the Renewable Energy Standard Reform Working Group. My name is Chris Bray, and I'm here with Jen Now. In terms of your other legislative members, Senator Watson is at work. Good morning.
Good morning.
And Representative Sibilia is traveling, and Representative Sheldon was not feeling well this morning, so she may be connecting with us remotely. So good morning, everyone. We were having a good discussion last week, and we're going to pick up from there. Jen, I don't know if you want to introduce the agenda for this morning. Sure.
So I'll put up on the screen a simplified agenda. For an agenda review now, and then very brief announcements if there are any. And then again, we will pick up the conversation where you left off last week. So that will require, if you have the poll results in front of you that you can look at, the aggregate results, it might be helpful because I do recommend, I want to emphasize, this is a good time to ask questions of each other if you have them. We'll have Ellen Schakowsky available, Legislative Counsel, available as needed. And also, I believe TJ Poor, Director of Regulated Utility Planning from the Department of Public Service, will also, or staff there will also be available as needed if there are content questions that arise. So where we may begin, where you can anticipate beginning at 8:40 when we pick up the discussion in earnest, is starting with where the conversation was circling last week, but didn't get to answers around where does the working group stand with respect to recommending a 100% clean energy standard versus 100% renewable energy standard. So we might start there, just testing the waters to see where people are, and talk a bit maybe as loads increase, how will Vermont look to meet that need, and then go back into the poll questions, probably starting with 7, which I think is just the tail end of tier 1 and then moving into the tier 2 and tier 3 questions. Public comment today will be at 11:40, and then 11:55 we'll do next steps, adjourn at noon. Breaks as needed, I'm guessing 9:30 and 11:30, but will be approximate. What I can promise is that public comment will begin at 11:40 so we can be true to people who are logging in at that point. Any questions about the agenda? Any announcements?
No, well, one quick one. We're a big group, and I think we've been working together well. There is, every once in a while, a sense that we run a little short in terms of time and in terms of people being able to comment. So I'd ask everyone to try to be self-aware of if you're speaking more frequently and or longer than your colleagues, to just hold back maybe a little bit to make sure that other folks have enough time. And with that, anything more?
You want to begin? So here's the invitation. I'm going to ask this question really directly, and I'm looking for the pithiest sort of direct answers that come top of mind, even though I know this is going to circle around and connect to a lot of the other issues you've been talking about for the last several meetings. The question is, where do working group members stand with respect to recommending a 100% clean energy standard versus 100% renewable energy standard? So I'm going to start very simply just to see where you are. How many of you are leaning towards recommending a clean energy standard, 100% clean energy standard? Could you let us know by raising your hand? 3, 4, 5. And those of you who are recommending a 100% renewable energy standard, is that everyone else remaining? And Lewis?
Sorry, not to be difficult here. I'm probably in a little bit of a unique place compared to my colleagues, because my board and my membership does not support nuclear power. but also recognizes that the important thing is carbon
Yeah.
load. So
So let's go there actually in a minute, because here's my question is, regardless of where you stand, it would be really important to understand why.
yep.
And the longer, so here's, that why could actually get very long and sprawly, because they're probably connected to several different whys. But to the extent that you can name the key rationale for why you're leaning towards clean energy or renewable energy, that would probably help simplify at least how far apart you are. And whether that why gets tempered or changed a little bit depending on how you identify eligible resources. So this doesn't have to be structured, but a sort of turn taking so we can hear from as many people as possible would be helpful. Representative Sibilia, did you want to start us off with a question or where you stand on that?
I just was not clear if my legislative colleagues actually weighed in. And if so, I will, and if not, I won't.
Do you mean weighed in on where they stood with clean energy or renewable?
Yes.
Well, I'm the only one I can see for me. Well, actually, there's Senator Watson. I put up my hand for renewable and not
Okay.
for clean for the standard itself.
Okay. So in that case, I will weigh in and say my preference would be clean. I'm also happy to keep it at renewable.
And why? Why is your preference clean?
I think that nuclear power is part of our future with the small modular reactors, and it's reliable. However, I think we can deal with that in the future, and existing nuclear power purchasing agreements through, just allowing the existing agreements at this point, and dealing with nuclear when the technology is a little bit more developed and ready for prime time. So I don't intend to dig in, and I don't think it would be wise for us to dig in on this myself. Thanks.
And I just to respond a little bit. It depends on, if we restructure, for instance, the tiers in some way, or have a new sub-tier or something like that, then it increases the number of options for how we might think about this stuff. But my response is based on sticking with the structure of the res as it is in current law.
How about others of you who are leaning towards a clean energy standard? Reason for why?
Senator Watson has her hand up.
Senator Watson, do you still have your hand up?
I just had taken it down because I am not in favor of clean, and you just asked a new question. I'm happy to weigh in, but I'm also happy to defer to your question.
The question can go either way. So really what I'm looking for is whether you stand on clean or whether you stand on renewable, what are you paying attention to when you make that determination? So you're for renewable, 100% renewable standard. And why?
Yeah, so 3 reasons. One is that I think uranium-based nuclear power is problematic. 2, I don't think the public would support it. 3, my goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and all the nuclear power, like I don't see people building new nuclear power, and so it doesn't help us to actually reduce. We would just be relying on existing nuclear power, so that doesn't help. Yeah, I'd like to see us move in a different direction than the nuclear.
Yes.
I'm happy to, so I voted for a clean standard. And so our board is committed to 100% renewable power supply. So in some ways, I thought Representative Sibilia reflected our views very accurately in terms of, would not take a hard stand and could certainly go towards 100% renewable. That's consistent. The reason why I think clean is a good idea for Vermont is a few reasons. One, we take a member poll every year, and every year we see increasing appreciation for nuclear and some of what it does. And I expect over time that will be changing as technology changes and as we look at the options for remaining zero carbon. Also, because I think it's an important part of the New England portfolio from a reliability perspective, and that Vermont being able to tap into that where it makes sense is good public policy. I also don't think it's, worth falling on the sword over, particularly because that's where we stand as an organization right now.
Can I ask a quick question? So
Sure.
when you say you poll, is this your members?
Yeah, we have an annual membership survey that we do, and we ask about how they feel about different power supply sources. And natural gas has been going like this, and nuclear has been going like this, and it's a pretty consistent trend over the last 5 years. So in terms of just, our job is to reflect the wishes of our membership. And so I think that's interesting to think about what 5-10 years from now might look like in terms of how people feel about those things.
Did you say that? So for Vermont Electric Co-op, you have nuclear contracts through 34?
We do, correct. And our commitment to 2034 will be, or 2030 will be about buying renewable energy credits to cover those the nuclear power we purchase.
And even if they end in 2034, you'll be planning well in advance of that for what is in 35, 36?
Correct. We're not planning yet, but we will be.
Yeah.
Yes.
How many of you are staying on a comment, just so I can get a queue of hands? Ryan, William, and anyone else? Jeffrey? Ryan, go ahead.
My viewpoint is very similar to Rebecca's. I support the concept of a clean standard today because I think from a perspective of where we stand with technology today, achieving 100% clean is much more viable than it is to be 100% renewable. But I think that over time, as the technology emerges, that we're going to be able to move towards a 100% renewable. So my thought is that for today, strike out for clean, maybe over time, recognize that the renewable has to increment, but that recognizes the nuances of contracts, it recognizes the nuances of technology, and it becomes much more programmatic to be able to achieve success.
Thank you. William?
Thanks. I think you'd asked us to expound on the clean arguments, and we support a clean approach because if the goal is addressing climate, then clean addresses that, and it's the broadest category. Therefore, it allows the greatest flexibility to find the most affordable and reliable means to achieve those goals. And I think with regard to contrasting that with renewable, there's a couple of points I think to keep in mind. One, we would certainly submit that nuclear is a legitimate option to keep on the table. And I think that's not an uncommon tool in the toolbox outside of Vermont to address climate issues. But it's not just nuclear. There's maybe other technologies that are, foreseeable or that may become available in the future. We should have a portfolio that can accommodate that. And it's also, it also comes down to how you define renewable. Some people would not define large hydro as renewable. Whereas, if we have a clean portfolio, we don't have to worry about parsing out what's renewable, what's not renewable. The point is that it's clean. And so I think in addition to, the important question, Jen, I think you raised, if you're saying, no, clean isn't good enough, it has to be something in addition to clean, then that's raising goals in addition to climate goals. And I think that folks should identify what goals they're pursuing because they want renewable rather than just clean, so that we can actually discuss those goals. But also, if people are going to say, no, it should be renewable, I think there should be more definition of what they think renewable is and isn't. So.
William, you had a question, Senator?
Yeah, I just want to check in because we're using the term clean, and I don't know if that's, so let me check in with how it's being used, what it implies. And I'm wondering if it, for the most part, seems to mean in this room that in addition to renewables, it allows for nuclear power. Is that, or is there more to it than that?
The way I hear it is low carbon. Not necessarily renewable, but low carbon power. So, I mean, yes, that would incorporate nuclear. That's how I.
Is anyone else defining it in a different way? I mean, I get low carbon, but as a technology at the moment, I think it sounds like we're talking about nuclear. Okay, just want to make sure I'm not missing something. Thank you.
Sorry to raise my hand, but just to be clear, I mean, again, it comes in how you define it. I don't know off the top of my head right now if hydrogen is considered renewable or not under current interpretation of the law. You have those kind of technologies. And again, some people don't think large hydro is renewable. So it's not just about nuclear power, although nuclear power should be included.
I'm going to go back to the queue that was lining up, and then if there are other comments, let me know by raising your hand. William is gone, Jeffrey, you're up, and then we'll see who else needs to speak.
Great, thank you. For us, it's looking at maximum flexibility in achieving a low carbon portfolio. Also, is equally important is the reliability of the power coming to our manufacturing facilities. Even the smallest interruption in power is significant in our business. And then we'd like to be able to keep alive the thought of a future evolving technology that may not necessarily be renewable, but there may be a low carbon future technology keep that available as well.
So your business is super sensitive to steady power.
So if the lights flickered in here and the power stayed on, we'd all just go about doing what we're doing. But I'd be making a call to the manufacturing floor to see if we lost any tools. And something as small as a quarter of a second can have a significant impact on our business and our output.
Christopher.
Thanks. I find it interesting that some of the comments have been around emerging technologies, right? We've had nuclear power in this country for 65 years. Not a single spent uranium rod has been stored adequately in any kind of sustainable way. So it's nice to just think about the smokestack and notice that it's not there, but that's just one piece of this. So Sierra Club is firmly against nuclear power for that lack of sustainability. And we're seeing headlines celebrating that Vermont Yankee is going to be decommissioned ahead of schedule, and the spent nuclear is sitting right there, and that was supposed to be handled by now. It's not even close to being handled. So I think we need to, what a great problem it would be to have people come to us, energy purchasers come to us and say, well, we're now 100% renewable or 95% renewable, and we have this 5% of our grid is powered by nuclear. Could we look at this question again? We have got to, in my opinion, shift to aggressively getting more renewables online. And when we talk about these kinds of definitions, what we're really talking about is ways to slow down that march to new renewable generation. And I don't think the science can handle that. The science is very clearly calling for the most aggressive approach we could handle. And the economics is, frankly, the reason no one's building new nuclear or even asking to build it is because of the economics. So for those reasons, I think we need to point very clearly and firmly towards a renewable standard.
One of the questions that I've written down when I'm listening for is what trade-offs are you paying attention to between a clean energy standard and a renewable energy standard? And one of the things you're not wanting to give up on is the progress towards renewables. You're also not wanting to give up on the reliability that you have in your current system. And so just trying to make sure that the sensitive system is able to move as quickly as it can. Here, go ahead.
Rev supports the renewable energy standard, probably not surprising, but I just want to clarify, I mean, I'm sure you know this, but I'll just say it out loud for the record for Jeffrey and for Representative Sibilia. Nuclear power is part of the mix now, and it really should be because it's keeping a lot of natural gas off the system, right? Even if we went to 100% renewable energy standard, everyone can still buy nuclear power as they want to do. There's no limit on the amount of nuclear power you're going to buy. You would just not be able to retire attributes associated with that nuclear power. So you would have to buy renewable energy credits to cover over that nuclear power, which is a cost issue, and we should discuss that. And that's an honest, decent policy discussion to have, whether we want to do that or not. But we're not limiting the purchase of nuclear power in the state of Vermont by moving to 100% renewable energy standard. Just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, so what you're saying is the option is still existing, it's a matter of affordability. So the reliability can still be there, but then you're watching the price points.
Well, right, it's whether, the price of having to buy a renewable energy credit to cover over the attribute of nuclear power. Right.
Okay. Did you have other questions? Yeah.
Well, yeah, so I'm just, as I'm taking notes, listening, I've heard Chris Pearson saying, and I've heard this from many other people, but he's one who most recently said it, we're looking to bring more renewables online. And I would say some people probably describe the res as requiring utilities to have 100% or 75% renewable portfolio. So I'm sensing, in a certain way, different goals or perceptions about what the res is all about. Are we directing people's portfolios to have certain attributes, or are we angling to, quote unquote, bring more renewables online? They could be, they're not the same thing. And so I'm just listening to the nuance of the one versus the other.
Ken, it looked like you had a comment.
Yes, thank you. And Senator Bray, I think, teed up what I was going to say is listening to the conversation, you're hearing most of the utility folks talk for or argue for flexibility. And I think that's, from my perspective, it's coming from actual practitioners who have to keep the lights on and make this all work. And understanding how difficult it is when we're talking about no large hydro qualifying. There's people who want to take biomass out. Nuclear is not available. You literally are forcing us to run the entire system off solar and wind, which from a reliability and affordability standpoint right now is a huge challenge. And the environmental side of the table is really looking more at the renewability and looking at trying to move the portfolio to a view that they have of the future. I don't think, at least I haven't heard any of the utilities argue with that future point, where we ultimately want to be. But I think the challenge is, how do you get there in a way that keeps rates affordable and keeps the lights on? And that's the struggle we're having.
Jen, can I just jump into Ken's question? Because I've been vocal about large hydro, for instance. I've not heard a single person assert either of those things about large hydro around this table, large hydro or biomass. So sure, there's that discussion out and about, but are you hearing that, something that I'm missing from this process that we're in?
I mean, I've heard a number of things around the large hydro and biomass, and discussions about ramping back biomass credits. We don't want to end up burning anything. Whether large hydro existing contracts can continue, but no new contracts being entered. I mean, the devil's always in the details, and how you ramp down the existing portfolio and bring in new resources is going to drive the reliability and affordability conversation. So I'm not sure I understand the entire position of some folks, but I certainly have heard comments that biomass and large hydro should be leaving the portfolio.
Let's stay with that for a bit. I know Peter had a comment, and it looks like Ben does too, but directly to Ken's question and trying to understand what is the ask.
I guess it's the same thing Chris said, but I just want to say, I've been sitting at these meetings and I haven't heard anyone say we should be ending our reliance on large hydro. I just haven't heard that. So I don't know where that's coming from.
Where is it coming from, Ken?
I think we're sitting in two different meetings. Because I hear in the conversations, I hear how large hydro, especially new large hydro, is bad. And we need to bundle the purchase of energy and RECs if we're going to continue to do existing contracts. And if we don't move in that direction, then that somehow has implications for how much in-state solar we need to do under tier 2. So there's a linkage happening there. And so when I start to think about how do you actually put a power portfolio together that meets these criteria, I maybe I'm inferring what's said behind the comments, but I don't know how you get there without making changes to your large hydro portfolio. And certainly the biomass has been, people have commented that, okay, existing biomass is okay. But there are efforts outside of this room by some of the same parties that are here to do away with biomass operation, or say you can't burn anything. So I have questions of whether that expands to landfill gas and things of that nature. So I think eventually we're going to have to get into what qualifies and what doesn't qualify. And I think this clean conversation pushes us in that direction.
Ben, you've had your hand raised for a while.
Sure, I did want to ask Representative Sibilia had her hand up. I don't know if that's old, but it definitely predated my hand. But happy to dive in. So I wasn't planning on speaking because I thought over the last couple of meetings we were really, really, really clear on some of these points, and I didn't want to waste everyone's time. But since it seems like somehow we weren't, I'll say it again. For Hydro-Quebec, no one has proposed us not allowing new contracts. I have not heard this come out of anyone's mouth, and I've been very clear that that is not part of our ask now, nor I'll just leave it at that. Two, a requirement that HQ RECs be bundled is also not something that VPIRG or I believe any of the other sort of environmental organizations on the call are pursuing. Ken, you noted that in your mind that was somehow tied to a very high tier 2 requirement. Again, I'll restate, new renewables writ large with some increase. Yes, some increase to tier 2. But I do think that there's been a conflation between us pursuing new renewable construction or the acquisition of RECs from new renewables, post 2010, with tier 2 exclusively. And that is absolutely not the case. And again, we've been trying to be clear at every turn about that tier 2 would be a portion of, and probably no more than half, even a minority of the new renewables. They're connected for sure, but we're very interested in finding a path that doesn't grapple with, some RECs can be bundled and some RECs can't be. That's not the conversation we are interested in getting tangled up in. And then on biomass, and this is in the survey, you can read my comment. From our perspective, yes, I would not want new biomass construction to be included in a new renewables tier, or at least that there be some minimum efficiency standards, some very high modern technology standards that would lean towards combined heat and power there. But we have not been trying to get it out of the existing renewables tier, just like we haven't been trying to get HQ out of the existing renewables tier, other large hydro out. And on landfill, I'm sorry, but that's just out of left field. Like, that's totally different than biomass. That is gas that is being created by waste that exists and is being flared already. And so while VPIRG is an organization that has pursued very aggressively a zero waste strategy for the state to minimize the creation of methane in landfills. If methane is coming out of landfills, it's better to capture it and use it than to let it escape as methane as the worst case scenario, or to flare it. So I guess the last thing I'll say is I'm very conscious of the fact that we're straying pretty far afield from the original question of like clean versus, I'll say clean versus renewable. And let me just say very briefly on that. Nukes are not of interest to us, partly because they're prohibitively expensive to build new. So we'd be talking about existing. And as we've discussed in other venues and from DPS modeling, relying on more existing sources is not actually going to cut greenhouse gas emissions. And then I would echo the comments that have been made by others about, if there are theoretical, small modular or fusion in the future, like let's cross that bridge when we come to it. But that stuff is not real right now. We're talking about, the nukes that we have with all the baggage that Chris talked about.
Thanks, Ben. Sibilia, you had your hand up.
Yeah. So Jen, first of all, I'm a little surprised that we're off on this tangent. I'll just make that statement.
And how do you name the tangent?
The clean versus renewable. So this was not my recollection of where we left off, but perhaps I was not paying attention. But to that end, was there a result of who wants to talk about a renewable energy standard versus a clean energy standard? Was there a vote result? Because my guess is that it's pretty close, and that we could probably use the rest of the time that we have allocated to meet before the session on this topic, which may be unhelpful. So I'm asking you, what was the vote?
So it wasn't a vote, it was just a straw poll. Raise your hand if you're for clean, 100% clean or 100% renewable. And it wasn't really close. It was divided. And then
it was not really close.
Unless I am misreading that. We can retake any poll.
I mean, it's close to even.
Oh, close to even. Oh, interesting. I was thinking whether it's actually, that's so funny. I wasn't talking about actual numbers, but in my mind, I was thinking, how close are you to actually standing in the same place on that question as a group of working members? And you're not close to that goal. You are in different, still pretty polarized places on the answer.
What was the number on that?
You can take it again, because there's more people on the call now. Candace and then Brian.
I guess I'm a little confused because the survey results were pretty overwhelmingly in support of 100% total renewable on an annual basis. So I think the discussion today feels because I think some of the voices are speaking out loudly around the clean conversation, but I would refer back to our survey results where it was actually not close. It was 14-3.
In support of renewable.
In support of 100% renewable on an annual basis. I know there's nuance in terms of what people added for their additional commentary on it. But I just wanted to bring us back to talking about the survey results a little bit more. And then just while I have the floor, Green Mountain Power is supportive of 100% renewable by 2030. It's been our goal for a while. It's a part of our overall planning process. And so that's what we're supporting.
Rep. Sibilia, would you like me to ask that question again and get an actual number to see? My guess is that people are still, when you try to answer that question, and Brian, I recognize you're waiting to make a comment. When people try to answer that question, they then go to the comments about yes or no, and it depends a little bit on how things are defined.
Jen, I wasn't sure if there was an actual number for a vote.
I didn't ask for a vote, just for a show of hands.
Okay. I appreciate Candace's good point about our survey results, which are what we agreed to talk about today. And perhaps we can move back to that and
sure, Brian,
what people meant to know.
Just for the sake of clarity, I'm looking at our results. And so one of the early slides, Tier 1 questions 2 through 11 should the RES move to 100% total renewable on an annual basis? Yes, 14, no, 3, other, 0, skip, 0. So 14 of 17 is roughly 83% group saying yes.
At that point.
Yeah.
Brian.
I was just going to point out the same slide, and since I wasn't here when did the show of hands, wanted to be clear that the NRC also is in favor of 100% renewable and not nuclear power for all the reasons that Senator Watson and Chris Pearson mentioned.
Okay. Very briefly, and then.
Just very quickly. I did vote yes on 100% renewable, but again, because it didn't ask by 2030 or any date specific, I would, if it had been 2030, I would have voted no. I'm all in favor of moving towards that in the long run. I'm just not there for doing it that quickly.
Yep. Here's why I'm nodding. I think sometimes a poll question, like on the survey, it seems like a simple question up front, and then you start reading the comments and you realize before people were to agree to something specific, they need to know how things were going to get defined or requested or the timeframes. That makes all the sense in the world. It's still a good straw poll. Candace had a question.
I was just gonna also add into that. I do think that there are lots of voices around, like not at this table, but out in the world that do complicate and call into question maybe some of how people are showing up in this space in terms of what we are agreeing to and what people have sort of acknowledged as a path moving forward on some of the topics that have been of, question around unbundled recs or eligibility of resources and all that other stuff. But I think for us to move forward in a productive way as this group, we have to take people at their word in terms of how we're all showing up in this space. And so that's what I'm choosing to do. And I feel like we've made good progress and moving forward on some of those topics that have historically been fraught, right? And so I just wanted to also say that part of it.
Thank you.
We can go back to our poll, Jess, again, maybe the numbers are helpful. That doesn't mean people can't have changed their mind or moved since, but so if yes, 100% renewable, in what year should Vermont move to 100%? 2030, it's 47%, 8 or 47%. If you go to 2032, you add another one person, 6%. If you go to 2035, you add another 2 people, 12%. So through 2035, it's 65% of the group. Through at 2030, it's 47% of the group.
So Chase, you had a comment. I would ask that if it's on the current conversation, just to keep it brief so that we can figure out how to pivot then to poll results. Go ahead.
Thanks. I appreciate that. I was just going to basically offer to Ken, since it sounds like there are still a lot of misunderstandings about things that are occurring in these meetings, just extend an invitation if you'd like to connect offline to ask questions, to clarify, just so that we can move forward productively. I just want to make that offer and just let you know that it's always open. I'd be more than happy to connect with you at any point to discuss. Thanks.
May I just ask for a quick clarification now, Chase? Is CLF in the same place as VPIRG, as Ben just articulated very clearly?
Sorry, was that a question for me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Could you just say it again? It was a little garbled.
Sure, yeah. I was just asking if CLF is in the same place. Ben just articulated VPIRG's position very clearly. Is CLF in the same place or somewhat different?
Well, as I heard Ben, he responded to a litany of things that Ken said that were inaccurate representations of where the environmental community is. And so as to all of those, I agree with Ben that the positions that Ken took are not accurate reflections of where the environmental community is actually at, or things that have actually been set around the table. I believe that CLF and VPIRG are pretty much aligned on all of the other things. I think that, the primary hangup is that there are a couple of voices that sort of have been quite loud. And I think that part of the reason that there's been a little deviation is that I think there's just some fundamental misunderstandings. about where folks are at. And so to answer the question directly, I think generally, yes, we're aligned with VPIRG. I think it would be helpful if folks have any questions to connect. Again, the invitation is always out there. We are extremely interested in
Did you finish your comment, or did your audio cut out?
Probably audio. I'm en route to Montpelier right now, so
okay.
I probably just hit a dead spot. But
okay.
I'll leave it at that.
Yep.
Great, thank you.
Goodness gracious. So here's the where that utterance is coming from. You covered a lot of ground at your last meeting. It was just last week. And in the end, sugared down on a couple of questions that I think we tried to dial in to this morning and went scattered again. You know, you came right up to the question of where do working group members stand with respect to recommending 100% clean energy standard versus 100% renewable energy standard, and talked around it a lot without actually asking each other to pick a position on that at the last meeting. And I think what this conversation opened up is some signaling around the trade-offs that you're paying attention to and conditions under which you might imagine a clean energy or a renewable energy. My guess is that by following, there's some real wisdom in going back to those poll results to see what they say, because that's where some of the details are that might answer some of those questions. You also, a real critical reframe that came out of last week is looking at, rather than some of the very specific pieces around unbundled or bundled, as loads increase, how will Vermont look to meet that need? What is the right level of new renewables? What counts as renewable? And a question that you can anticipate coming up in the next several meetings is, again, what approaches are going to result in the most equitable impacts, cost-wise, accessibility-wise? My hunch is that as you start this conversation today, you might run into areas where there's analysis or content that might be helpful. And if that's the case, then please raise that question, because if it's not available now, Brattle Group is coming up in your next meeting and might be able to answer some of those macroeconomic questions. Here's my inclination, but I want to just check in with you, Senator Bray, to see if it's yours as well, is to move into the poll results. We are at a funny timing. I don't know if you'd want to take a quick break to either ask questions of each other or just shake this conversation off and come back and reset around the poll results.
Well, and we also have TJ here, so we're
this is actually older agenda for whatever reason.
Can I offer something?
Yeah, you can.
We have Senator Watson for a limited time till her workday starts. Maybe we power through till we have to lose Senator Watson.
That would be great. Yeah, okay. So that's a fine suggestion. You okay with that?
Yeah, good idea. Thank you.
And if I may jump in here as well, you know, just thinking about the conversation that we've had and, you know, thinking about our decision-making processes with this group. And, you know, I think, you know, consensus is a good goal, and I think we want to try to get there, but I want to recognize that we may not all, you know, get to like 100% consensus. And so just want to just bring us back to like, it's at some point we're going to need to make some decisions.
At some mysterious point, yes. You have this meeting and 3 others with this group.
And we have a lot to decide on, so.
Yeah, and my goal is really to try to figure out, if you know what questions you're carrying forward, particularly those that you'd like some other insight around from the Brattle Group or from the other analysis that's coming out, to get those distilled and get that information to you so that you're making informed decisions when it's time to make them, to the extent that you need that information anyway. So, poll results. Let me pull up, this is such an awkward transition, but it's right in the middle of the survey on page 6. You're on question 7. This is a question you didn't get to at your last meeting, so that's where I was going to pick up the conversation, if that makes sense. What percentage of tier 1 resources should be new renewable energy resources as defined by post 2010 by 2035? So just a reminder that you took this poll in early to mid-October. These were the answers at that point. Just a note that, sorry, go ahead.
Well, one thing, so this question's already been put out and people responded to it. And I don't want to sidetrack this. The current standard doesn't use 2010 as a landmark date. So I'm not, at some point, I'd like to check in and see why that's being set as a landmark relative to tier 1 and what the implications of using post 2010 as a time warning.
Peter, did you want to answer that?
I'm not going to answer now.
Yeah, that'd be great.
You said at some point, maybe it's not this point.
I think I know the answer, but if I'm wondering, maybe other.
Okay, 2010, one reason to use 2010 is it allows us to capture the wind resources we built just prior to 2015. Those are important resources we want to make sure stay online and are REC eligible.
Thank you.
So in your comments to this question, when you answered it in earlier October, a lot of you mentioned that needing to offer percentage as an answer was a little bit limiting. So several of you actually skipped this question and then noted that in your comments. Even those of you who did answer had more detail in the comments, and so maybe those will pop up in the discussion at large. The way I collated the comments on, they combined 7 and 8, which might have been a little confusing. I'll show you the responses to 8 here. And then I can give you a very brief summary about what the comments said. Again, they're not comprehensive and it doesn't have to be the final word. It's really because I know participants and people who are watching all have had spent a different amount of time with the results. Those who answered, 60% on question 7 here, a lot of you were citing that citing 60% because of reducing greenhouse gases, noting the need for strong siting and specifically natural protection resources around solar built environment in particular. And there were specifics on low impact hydro noted there. The lower percentages, the 10%, 20% noted here in these results, those comments reiterated the challenge of imposing limits on types because it makes building an affordable here. You've heard that before. And the comments, and those one or both questions, 7 or 8, a lot of you were citing in your comments these kinds of considerations: affordability, lowest cost, and reliability, and interest in encouraging electrification. Again, reiterating that flexibility makes it easier for contracts to meet those needs rather than a fixed percentage. If you have questions of each other, especially based on what you see in those results, I encourage you to take this time to ask each other those questions. Jace, is your hand up because you have a question or because it hasn't just come down from your last comment?
Because it hasn't come down, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'll try to get that.
I got it. Questions of each other around questions 7, 8, or 9.
I don't know if this fits into the tier 1 aspect or not, but one question that I have is a lot of people have talked about the advent of storage. And I'm wondering as to how people are viewing storage as being a potential resource for the purposes of meeting these requirements. Because storage in of itself doesn't create generation and therefore would not create RECs. And it basically, in theory uses already created generation and RECs. So I'm just of the opinion that I don't see storage participating in this, but I don't know how other people feel about that.
How are others thinking about storage? Do you have a quick answer to that question or?
I would just say we see it as an enabler of this as opposed to a requirement or so it will be used as necessary as technology is available to pair the renewability with the reliability.
Rex Belia, your hand's up.
Yeah, I am wondering if TJ has anything to add to this comment, and if I were in the room, I would be looking to see if TJ had anything to offer on these discussions. Thanks.
DJ is in the room. Do you know what Rep. Sibilia is asking? The audio is a little tough, but you're welcome to come up.
Yeah, I don't know if I should be on camera or not. Can I just speak from here? All right. So, on the particular issue of, well, since I'm up here, I'll back up for a second and just add one data point to the previous conversation. Apologies that this is late. That utilities have 3.5 million megawatt hours of nuclear in 2022, and those are contracts that go through 2034. There's actually more nuclear, but some of those contracts end. But so in thinking about a 100% res versus 100% clean, I think it's important to think of, okay, those are embedded contracts that the cost of the contract, including the attributes, are included. So those are kind of business as usual costs. Moving to 100% res requires the purchase of renewable energy credits at $5 a megawatt hour, kind of roughly what they're at now. That's $17 to $18 million that ratepayers would pay. So that's the trade-off. I'm not going to comment here. It's not my role here to comment whether that's worthwhile. That's part of the trade-offs that you all are struggling with, and I think appropriately so. So it's, you need to cover those purchases with RECs for $18 million. And what are you getting out of that? And I think that you all talked a little bit about that. No support for nuclear is one thing and one policy priority. There's no difference in emissions. We're not talking about new renewables in this instance. So there's no difference in emissions as we count for the Global Warming Solutions Act or societally. There are existing resources already. And then there's kind of that support for reliability regionally is kind of another trade-off. So I think those are the main trade-offs, but I wanted to make sure you all had that data point of that's another piece of the trade-off. On the question related to storage, I think I've said this before, and in our analysis, just so you know that this is a kind of a separate, storage is separate, like the costs and benefits of storage are not included in the department's analysis of different scenarios for our power supply future. And so I think it's those need to be evaluated separately. In my opinion, as we go forward and we decide on how much renewable, new renewable, existing renewable are in the portfolio, that is going to have an impact related to the amount of generation that we have on a seasonal or hourly basis versus the amount of load we have. And then once we kind of know how much we want to push on new resources, new renewables, then it's the time to evaluate what is the least cost way to solve any issues that any imbalance between that generation and load might cause. And so, so on the storage question, I think it's separate, but thanks for letting me add that other data point to the previous discussion.
I have a quick question on the data point. So that's purchasing RECs at $5 a megawatt hour. So I'm trying to remember, can you help me with remembering the class system for RECs? And are you choosing a more expensive REC for backfilling in that case? Or is that sort of the market price of what's a less expensive REC, and that's what it is today?
Right, that's the less expensive REC, and roughly what it is today for what is currently a tier 1 renewable energy credit. So that includes any existing resource in New England is a tier 1 resource, or imported to New England. So Hydro-Quebec counts there.
Senator Watson, let's get you in here before you have to leave. Did you have your hands raised?
I do. So my question was about the about the questions that you are asking us to reflect on. I'm in the slideshow, and I don't have the numbers of the questions directly connected to the slides. So I'm wondering which slides, like which questions on which slides you are asking us about.
So I'm asking about 7, 8, and 9.
So slides 7, 8, and 9?
They are questions 7, 8, and 9. And the slides, the most helpful thing is probably going to be looking not at the slideshow, but at the summary that it's a.
Okay.
You're probably going to find it in your invitation from Sorsha.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Did you have another question though, Senator Watson, that you're trying to figure out that anyone here could speak to before you need to scoot?
No, I mean, I'm feeling pretty clear myself. I have questions, I will let you know. I just also wanted to make sure that we're coming back to the questions in the that were on the survey.
So the question that I asked the group is, if you saw anything in those comments, the poll results that you wanted to ask each other about, this is a chance to do so.
This is, and I'm trying to be cognizant of Senator Bray's admonition to me not to talk too much, but this is a very important point for Washington Electric Co-op.
And the point is?
The new renewables question. Because our members spent millions of dollars to build a renewable plant at the Coventry landfill. It came online in 2005. Before they were required to do so, before there was a requirement for that, before there was even really a rec market for that, they spent millions of dollars, borrowed millions of dollars to build that plant. They also engaged in long-term contracts with Sheffield Wind, with the NIPA power source, other places. To have a new renewable standard that requires that they then buy, well, and I should say, first of all, they are currently required to buy very expensive net metering power. So at times when we don't really need the power. So right now we're buying very expensive net metering power and then selling other renewable power into the market at a loss. We're essentially buying at retail and selling at wholesale. And I don't know much about business, but I know that that's not how you do it. To have a new renewables requirement raises the potential for us to then be losing because we were early adopters of renewable power. And to require us to sell that renewable power we have either own or have contracts for into the market at a loss to buy a required new renewable that came online post 2010. And the net effect of that will be not only to raise rates for our members, but also to disincentivize beneficial electrification because the power that people will use for heat pumps and electric vehicles will be more expensive. So that in a nutshell is our concern, basically that because we were early adopters of renewable power and invested money in renewable power, we are now at risk from a new renewable standard. And if we're going to choose 2010, we can choose 2004. And I could make just as solid an argument for our Coventry plan as for the Kingdom Community Wind project. So that in a nutshell is our issue. Now, everything I just said does not take into account load growth. I want to acknowledge that. We are projecting for the first time in over a decade increased load. So none of that takes into account load growth, and I just want to acknowledge that. But for us, net metering and the potential for a new renewables requirement is basically costing our members additional money and raising the rates that they will use for their electric vehicles and heat pumps because they were early adopters of renewable. Thanks.
Yep. Do you have a question about that?
But no, just a comment. So for myself, I'm keeping track and listening, and what I don't fully understand yet is on the date issue. If any date prior to the implementation of the current regs, then could have the effect of disincentivizing. It seems contrary to some of the push for bringing new renewables online if we start now accounting for pre-existing resources in a new way. And so I haven't sussed out why we're going, hearing a conversation that seems to be going two different directions at once. I'm sure for one or more people, this makes sense, and I'm going to be trying to understand that better.
The art of the possible is your domain, Senator, not mine.
We have two comments up online. Are they, when what I'm asking you to do is if you have questions of each other based on the comments in question 9, and then William.
My question was just a clarifying one for TJ. TJ, I think I heard you say that current contracts for nuclear are 3.5 million megawatt hours. Is that right? And two, am I doing the math just in my head, the math correctly? That sounds like about 60% to 2/3 of all power contracts, which sounds very high for me. I thought GMP was like at 20% and VEC was maybe 15 or 20% nuclear. What am I not adding up correctly?
3.5 million is correct. You're right. If the state is, total in 2022 was around 20% nuclear. I'm not sure what the exact numbers are. I think you may be conflating I don't know. I don't know how to.
All right, let's just
bend that back, but we can follow up. So just the numbers, I can send them to folks after this meeting. It's from the annual resource survey that we do to all the utilities. We require the utilities to provide data to the department, and that's when you see me present on pie charts of what our power supply mix is. That's what that is.
Okay, thanks for sending that around, and yeah, we can take this offline.
William?
Thanks. I think kind of gets back to some themes or questions I've brought up before. So, obviously, we're coming from this from a maximum flexibility perspective, so we don't feel there should be a set percentage for new renewable. But the question I guess I would have is, based on the, the conversations to date on this group, whether it's a clean or renewable portfolio, I think it sounds like there's every expectation that new renewables will be part of the mix for utilities to meet those goals. It might be different for different utilities, but they're going to be part of the mix. So the question, since climate isn't on the table, isn't an issue, and if you want, for the sake of argument, say it's 100% renewable portfolio, renewability isn't an issue. What for the folks that want a mandatory minimum new renewable, and pick your percentage, why do you feel that's necessary as opposed to allowing utilities to fit new renewable in as it makes the most sense for cost and reliability?
Does anyone have an answer for that question?
I do.
Go ahead.
Yeah, if I understood the question correctly, I think it's been answered multiple times, actually, respectfully, which is, but perhaps it's just been explained to me multiple times, and I'm imagining that happened here in the meeting. My understanding of why new renewables is to increase when we are drawing mixed off the grid to decrease the emissions from the mix, and also to increase our resiliency within the state.
William?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Laura, but I guess the question, so with regard to the mix, I think that's addressed. I don't think that's at stake because we're talking about the context of 100% or requirement. So whether it's clean or renewable, let's just say it's renewable. If you have a 100% renewable requirement, then I don't know if the mix concern is at stake. And with regard to resiliency and things like that, that's obviously within the within the matrix of how utilities plan their resources for reliability, resiliency, costs. So again, I think everybody should be able to agree or assume that utilities will be factoring that in to what mix they think makes the best sense for their territory. So the question is, why do they need to have a specific mandatory minimum as opposed to letting them find the best fit for their situation?
Right. Did you have a comment?
Well, I'm going to flag it maybe to come back to later or offline. I'll chase this down some more, but I not infrequently hear people refer to grid mix, and one of the concerns expressed is the amount of natural gas that's used in ISO New England in order to keep the grid up. But I'm struggling a little because I'm not sure how relevant the quote unquote grid mix is to any particular utility in Vermont in particular, because each DU goes out and has its own contracts and they purchase their own power. So it could be that a Vermont utility, even if the grid mix is whatever, 60% renewable natural gas, might be purchasing none of that because of their own particular portfolio. So I just want to make sure that we keep our eyes on what our utilities are doing as opposed to what ISO is doing in general. Because sometimes we go back and forth between them, and I don't think it helps us.
I might be able to comment on that a little bit, because we look at these trade-offs as part of our, as we outlined in our comprehensive energy plan, and as we're looking in the analysis that we're doing. I think if it's possible to kind of keep both things in mind, like impacts to utilities and Vermonters and rates they pay and impacts to society, right? And we look at both of those. And I think the trade-off is, and this is the way we constructed our analysis, so I'll frame it as that data point here, is that the only renewables in a renewable portfolio standard that are assigned to counting towards reducing emissions are those new renewables that are constructed. So that from the current baseline to wherever we go, if you add new renewables, that's what's actually having a societal impact on emissions, is those new renewables. And then I think there's the economic development impacts of the higher cost of that versus like the construction jobs and, those local benefits that you get. And that's the analysis that Brattle is doing, right? And so that's how I would think about that, Bill, in your question. And like, what are we getting out of having some requirements kind of below that 100% umbrella? Those are some of the trade-offs that we think about. And then we balance like those economic development and emissions benefits, societal emissions benefits versus costs to Vermont ratepayers. And I think your point on the emissions benefits is, as we track, this is where it gets really confusing, as we track to the Global Warming Solutions Act greenhouse gas reduction requirements, all that greenhouse gas inventory looks at right now is the portfolio. So it would look at 100% renewable. Any new renewables would have no impact on our tracking towards those GWSA requirements. It's like the societal impact where we are physically actually kind of ramping down those natural gas units. And so doing my best not just to kind of put the trade-offs on the table and not put my, any policy preferences that I might have or the administration might have on this for your discussion here. But that's kind of, I think those are some of the balancing factors that we all struggle with, right?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, TJ, because I think that kind of goes back to something that's come up a little bit before. It's been touched on, I think, one of Lewis's early questions. And I think maybe clarify here what you mean in terms of what counts or doesn't count. So let's just do a hypothetical here. Say we have a 100% renewable requirement. And let's say through either, unused capacity, or maybe a new capacity that doesn't count as new renewable, perhaps, or even just for the sake of hypotheticals, let's say we outbid as contracts move, we outbid other states for existing renewable resources, and in doing so, we meet 100% of our portfolio through renewable energy. So everything is renewable. If that doesn't include new renewable, but it is renewable, and we're meeting our load through 100% renewable, are you saying that that does not count for anything, or that we have not met our goal? And I'm saying you personally. I mean that.
No, I think we would meet our well, we would do what we can in the electric sector for our GWSA requirements, but the new has no difference there, whether we use existing or new towards our GWSA requirements, no difference. Where it societally, I think what you're saying is, well, hey, the other states will then have to build new renewables. And maybe, but I think that brings up, I think that gets into a whole second layer of the onion of like who's really driving that new renewable? Is it Vermont or is it the other state? And
and again, even if new growth is met through existing renewables and not new renewables in this hypothetical. So even if Vermont is meeting its obligations and is not contributing to climate concerns through our electric portfolio, that's not enough. So in other words, this kind of gets back, not to put words in your mouth, Louis, but I think you asked kind of a similar question earlier on. So you're saying that we are taking on responsibility, financial responsibility, ratepayers, for New England renewable development, and beyond what simply Vermont's portfolio is, what Vermont's responsibilities are. That's what it sounds like. So I don't know if that's what you see it as, or what other folks see it as, but that's certainly what it sounds like at this point.
So, William, if there's a response to that, great. And then unless the hypothetical is going to bring in some new territory for others, there are a couple other comments.
Obviously,
Was there a response to that?
Lose the track sometimes if we don't stick on it.
Yeah.
I appreciate
Is there a response to that?
I do have a very quick response, and I'll just note that.
Is that Chase?
Sorry, this is Chase. I'm almost to the State House after daycare drop off. I just would say that we have covered this same ground a bunch of times. And so I really don't want to belabor this too much. The point that Bill just brought up is one that we have discussed a lot. But I will just note a couple of things. One is Vermont is not an island. We are part of the region. It's not like we have a scenario in which there's Vermont and then there is the region. Vermont is part of the region. Our grid is interconnected. Our electrons flow freely. We are not really divisible in a meaningful way from the rest of the region. And so creating these sorts of hypotheticals in which we're contemplating doing something for Vermont versus doing something for the region, it's just, although it's sort of like, I think, simpler in some ways to think of it that way, it's just not accurate. It's just not the way the grid works. And so I would just caution us not to go too far down that hypothetical that Bill is setting up. And the other thing that I just note is that I think a big reason why new renewables are important is because if we are going to meet the greenhouse gas emission reduction requirements that are necessary across all sectors of our economy, we need to be looking at electricity growth, because we need to anticipate that more heat pumps will be coming online and more electric vehicles will be used. And as that load grows, we're going to need to be acquiring more electricity to meet it. And if we are acquiring that electricity from new renewables, then we are in fact reducing emissions overall. And the reform to the RES will have the sectoral wide impact that it really ought to have. And the policy goals will largely be achieved. If we don't, however, if we allow that new load to be met with whatever happens to be out there and not require new renewables to be built, then Vermont being a part of this overall larger system and not an island in and of itself will not, in fact, be driving down emissions in the global sense, in the regional sense, in the sense that actually matters to the atmosphere, to the planet we all live on. And so it's really about skating to where the puck is going to be. At the end of the day, it's really just a practical, very common sense thing that if we are going to decarbonize, if we are going to do our part to meet the climate crisis, we need to grow load, we need to electrify, and we need new renewables to do it. And if we divert ourselves off that course by using hypotheticals like the one Bill used, we're really just doing ourselves a disservice because we're missing the bigger picture of how we actually, as a state, as a region, as a planet, need to solve this crisis. Okay. I'll just leave it at that.
Thanks, Jace. Probably oversimplifying, but I do think it keeps coming back to the questions where you all landed at the end of the last meeting. As loads increase, how will Vermont look to meet it? What's the right level of new renewables and what counts as renewable? I recognize Christopher's been waiting for a while with a comment. And I also know that there's a little bit of angst in the room because as this conversation heats up and starts to revisit territory and you're not quite sure where it's going to land, you probably need a little bit more structure from me about how you're going to use your time. Christopher, if you could share your comment and then we'll play that out to the extent that it needs to and then take a break. We'll reconvene with the poll results again. Christopher, go ahead.
Sure. A couple of questions. One for Lewis's comment some time ago. I think he makes a fair point, and I think that's why there's broad consensus, that his utility was an early adopter and has been treated differently than, and we've, as I understood, agreed that there shall not be one res, but some flexibility to recognize the investments that certain utilities have made. So, I take your comments well, and I think that we've all agreed on that. And then I just want to appreciate that you also looked at new load or referred to that differently. So I guess I just want to say that to me, there's a consensus that agrees with your point and is not throwing your ratepayers and members under the bus. I do have a question though, more directly for TJ is storage. Going back to storage, we started part of this conversation a while ago, and it was quickly addressed, I think, maybe by Candace or others, that that's a facilitator, right? Storage facilitates bringing on new solar in particular. For the department, though, square this for me. You have the state's largest utility saying they want to invest in storage, particularly to avoid costs of to the distribution system, and see storage as the key factor for reliability and quote unquote eliminating outages. I don't think those analysts, those people who are in the real world of buying power and making this work, they don't discount those prices casually. And so just square that away for me. That seems like a pretty interesting departure from what I'm hearing from the department, and really central to this discussion, especially because when a lot of us push on the need to build new renewables to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, we're told that it's unrealistic. A lot of us think storage is part of that solution. It fits in here as an enabler in a sense. So I'd love to just understand at a root cause how the largest state's utility is saying storage is a game changer, is economically beneficial as an investment strategy, particularly around renewables. And the department doesn't seem to be echoing that, that would really help me.
Christopher, this is could be a big question. I don't know. And it sparked a couple of different hands. So your question goes to TJ, and then Rebecca, if you still had a comment, and it looked like Ken had a comment. I just want to note that I am really trying to move us towards a break as soon as possible. So
I'll be quick. I'll try. One, that case, that particular case you're referring to or investments referring to are proposed before the Public Utility Commission, so I can't really talk about specifics. We'll evaluate that case. I don't think, the department is not, it would be really bad for the state if the department was just echoing our investor-owned utility in the state. We need to do our own independent analysis. So, but with that, I think we need to be careful about the use cases of storage, right? The use case of storage to prevent outages in the, in the winter or, to ride through storms is different than the use case for enabling distributed generation. There may be some overlap there, and we're looking at that in that maybe you can use some of it for both, but maybe not. And so we just, we can't just assume storage that is going in. We have permitted or cited already about 10% of last year's peak load in the state of storage, right? That's really high in terms of states around the country and New England and what's already kind of in play. There's some goals that are higher, but we're seeing a trajectory that, is headed to surpassing those goals already. The cost, we just need to evaluate the cost versus the use case. Like if we're counting if we're looking at storage to avoid peaks, load peaks, right, and avoid load charges, then is that storage going to be available to kind of smooth generation? That I don't know the answer to that, but I do know it's not going to be available 100% of the time. It's probably not. It may be available more than 0% of the time to smooth the generation, which is different than load peaks. And so there are different use cases, and then what the proposal before the commission is one use case, and we're talking about a whole different, like, where do we go with renewables here? If we just assume storage is there, then we're assuming that some costs are paid for by something in order to support or enable all of that renewable generation. And I don't think that's a fair assumption either. So there's, I don't agree with your characterization of the department's position on things, but I think that's how we think about it, just generally.
Is your comment still relevant, Rebecca?
Just very quickly, I wanted to comment on a lot of the projections around load growth, and just note that 3 years ago, we did some projections saying that we would see load growth this past year due to adoption of electric vehicles and heat pumps. We have seen the adoption of electric vehicles and heat pumps, and our loads are down quite significantly. And so it's just a note to say, so far the conversation's been really focused on percentages. I think that's important because I think, Chase, to your comment of skating where the puck is at, we sort of don't even know from a load perspective what that will look like either. So maintaining that flexibility around that. I think our long-term 30-year projections are still valid, but what it looks like and plays out for the next 10 years feels pretty hard to predict. So just wanted to hold that in the room. Thank you.
I'm sorry, did you say you haven't seen anything yet?
This past year, our loads are down, even despite
EVs and
heat pump adoption, which are more than we forecasted. So there's a lot of variables at play.
Ken, is your comment still relevant?
A couple comments on the storage aspects. Candace will know this better, but when I've talked to Mary McClure at GMP, I mean, storage is one small piece of their zero outage plan. So I agree it's important, but it's not really driving their investment. On on the same token, I think all the utilities, at least as far as I'm aware, are really looking strongly at new storage. I know VEPSA put in a $100 million DOE grant specifically for storage investment. We didn't get it in the first round. But every one of the VEPSA members is pushing us to look at their system as a potential microgrid and figure out how to put batteries on to manage the system. But what we're finding is it's really site specific, and you actually the amount of storage you can put on a circuit can be limited by the amount of load there. So for that reason, we're really concerned about putting like blanket standards in an RES or something like that, because you can actually be counterproductive if you put minimums in, rather than dealing with the renewable energy aspect and letting utility focus on batteries as a reliability answer. Stop there. Thanks.
Can I just make clear? I wasn't proposing that we itemize some storage. It's just a modern piece of this puzzle. I haven't heard anybody suggest some kind of storage minimum, but thanks.
I'm going to recommend a break at this point. Does that work for you?
Yes.
So 15 minutes, reconvening at 10:15.